Right now on Upfront.
TikTok turmoil.
We have invested to keep your data safe.
The urgent ultimatum, the overwhelming bipartisan vote in the House.
We're not after a ban, we are after a divestiture.
Will TikTok's owners sell or face a U.S. ban? Will the Senate even act?
I haven't spoken to Donald Trump about the bill.
Our guest this Sunday, Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, the bill's lead author, and White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Then, spoilers?
The Democrats have abandoned their base. They have no one to blame but themselves.
Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein in Wisconsin.
They know they would lose. They would lose the day.
And she's with us, another bid for president, as protesters attempt to greet President Biden in Milwaukee. How that's fueling her campaign, and Charles Franklin with a new third-party analysis.
Disproven.
The claims of voter fraud that we're hearing just don't have a foundation in truth.
Ken Block, the expert, the Trump campaign hired to find fraud in states like Wisconsin immediately following the 2020 election. His new book, his investigation in Wisconsin, and what he told the campaign moments away.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Fast-moving developments continue this weekend surrounding the fate of TikTok.
170 million Americans potentially impacted. The House on a 352 to 65 vote, giving TikTok's owner, the Chinese company ByteDance, 6 months to divest or face a U.S. ban. The bill's fate, though, incredibly uncertain in the Senate. All of this is former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin saying in recent days he's putting together a group of investors in an attempt to buy the popular app.
Congressman Mike Gallagher joins us just off the vote on the road. Congressman, hey, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Great to be with you.
So this overwhelmingly passed the House as expected. I'm curious what message you hope this sends not only to TikTok, but I guess more urgently to the Senate.
Well, I think the message it sends to the Senate is that 352 members of the House, which never come together on anything in bipartisan fashion, think this is a serious national security threat. The message it sends to TikTok is simple. TikTok users can continue to enjoy the app. They can continue to do dance videos. They can continue to post their political leanings as long as ByteDance divests from TikTok. That is what we are after. We're not after a ban. We are after a divestiture.
TikTok has already asked some of its users to contact their lawmakers about this. I want you to take me inside. What types of phone calls, messages, and how many has your office gotten since you introduced this bill?
A lot. I actually think that tactic backfired and kind of proved the point we were trying to make. You had TikTok forcing a push notification onto millions of users, asking for their location data, automatically calling members of Congress, spreading lies about the bill. In some cases, TikTok kids were threatening suicide or impersonating the children of members of Congress. I think that gave people a glimpse of what could happen if we were debating a weightier issue like an authorization of force to defend Taiwan or revoking China's permanent normal trade relations status. If the CCP decided to weaponize the platform to spread misinformation in America, that would have devastating consequences.
The ACLU has said that this bill is unconstitutional. There are some lawmakers who point to privacy and antitrust concerns as well. Representative Moore, Representative Pocan, both voting against this bill. Do you think that this is going to end up in the courts?
I'm sure TikTok will try to sue if the bill passes, as they've threatened legal action against every effort. But we've now worked for 8 months to really hone the text of the bill. We've invited technical assistance from the White House. I've been forced to change my original construct. We feel confident that we're in a place where the bill would survive any legal scrutiny. There's no First Amendment issues at issue with the bill.
How confident are you that ByteDance would divest if this passes and the president signs it?
I think ultimately it'd be up to the Chinese Communist Party and ByteDance executives. I know for a fact there are major ByteDance investors who would welcome a divestiture. So I really do think we have a chance to make it happen. And I think that would be great for everybody. It'd be great for TikTok's users. It would be great for ByteDance's investors, and it would alleviate my national security concerns.
How much power does former President Donald Trump have over Senate Republicans right now in this?
I don't know. I mean, obviously the president sort of signaled mixed feelings about this on Sunday, but it didn't prevent a massive vote this week. Honestly, the effort kind of starts with Donald Trump. He was the one in 2020 who tried to do this. He tried a ban. He tried to force a sale. He ran into a legal buzzsaw, but he was right back then to highlight the threat posed by China's control of the app.
Before you go, Congressman, you recently announced you will not seek re-election. At this point, it's all but certain Trump will be the Republican nominee. Curious, are you going to attend the convention here in Milwaukee this summer?
I don't know if I've even been invited to go to the convention or speak at the convention. So I don't know. I have no plans.
You are a Republican congressman from Wisconsin. I'm sure the invite will be out.
I know, but I'm a has-been at this point. No one cares what I think. I'm old news now that I'm not running again anymore.
So that's a maybe. We'll leave it at that.
I don't know. You know, there's a lot of things I need to do this summer. We'll see. I got this legislation I'm passing. There's 149 other recommendations. We'll see what happens.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, thank you so much, like always.
Thank you.
The White House this weekend also working behind the scenes on the TikTok bill. Here's White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Well, the president has said he will sign it if this does pass the Senate. I'm assuming that is his plan to sign this legislation.
So what I can say is this. We've been working. We welcome this piece of legislation. It's a bipartisan legislation. It is important for our national security. It's important that we protect people's privacy. And that's something that the president has said. This is about ownership. This is not about banning TikTok or any companies. This is about who owns the information of Americans, and should that company be owned out of the country or here? And we believe it should not be owned in China, for example. So this is a welcome piece of legislation. We are working closely and offering technical assistance to Congress to get this through. And so that is the way that we're looking at it. Again, we are really I think it's important, and we want to see where it goes.
The White House is working with Senate Democrats on this?
Yeah, the White House is working with Senate Democrats and Republicans. This is a bipartisan bill, so we are going to be working as we do, especially on important pieces of legislation that matter to the American people. We're going to be working with both sides of the aisle.
As for TikTok, executives now launching a counteroffensive. The CEO on Capitol Hill meeting with senators. The company also sending alerts like this to users across the country, urging them to contact their lawmakers, even providing a direct link based on their zip code.
This is content creators on the popular app are also closely watching the developments.
It's concerning because this is the third major attempt to ban this platform yet again. And if this was the first time I could see that stress, I felt that stress that first time they tried to ban it. And after that, I started making changes in my strategy to accommodate the fact that TikTok could be gone.
How much money would you miss out on if TikTok went away?
Probably in the 5 figures.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, I would say 5 figures within annually.
And what are creators saying right now? I mean, are you hearing from other TikTokers? Are they worried? What's kind of the sentiment?
There's a lot of TikTokers that are upset locally and nationally. The fact is, it's a platform that connects creators to their audience. And if you are thriving on TikTok, you are at risk of losing that connection. You've got years, potentially, of content you've created that will no longer be accessible to you.
All right, more action on that expected this upcoming week in the Senate. Up next, protests. Third-party candidates. Jill Stein, the Green Party presidential candidate in Wisconsin, and she's here. Plus, Charles Franklin, the new instant analysis. Up next.